afternoon, or good evening, whenever, wherever, and however you're watching this. This is our deeper dive into this past Sunday sermon here at Tuckaseege. We call this Digging Deeper because it works. This past Sunday, we finished up the Gospel of Hope, 1 Peter, and we kind of, Peter brings it all together kind of in the summary of his letter, his final greetings. He is encouraging and imploring his readers, those who have read his letter, to get what it was he was talking about and then to apply it to their lives. In the end, in the last verse there, he says, "This is the true grace of God." Everything that I've told you, this is the true grace of God. Now you stand firm in it. And so it reminds us that it is the grace of God, is our understanding of the grace of God that allows us to stand firm in all the situations that we're in. Here in North Carolina, where we're at, it's been oppressively hot, and not just like a dry heat, which I know that's bad too, right? You know, the comedian said, hey, 200 degrees is a dry heat in your oven, but you're not sticking your head in there. And I get that. But man, it has just been like walk outside and you're just a weight on you. And a lot of times the suffering, the problems, the cares of this world, those things, we carry those things with us, or they hold us back, or they suffocate us, just like the southern humid mid-afternoon, right? And so how do we stand firm in all of this? How do we stand firm when the world and everything else is coming at us, when we go through this suffering, trials, tribulations, persecutions, whatever it is that we go through, the anxieties and trials of this world? We are able to stand firm because we stand firmly on the grace of God and in the grace of God. And it's to the extent that we understand the true grace of God that we're going to be able to stand. And the thing that we talked about this past Sunday was really kind of defined the true grace that he had went through, what that looks like in our lives and how we live that out. But also to a bigger extent too, was this like, do we really understand that? Because it's the extent that you understand God's grace that you are going to find joy, hope, and faith and trust in everything that he does for you. When you understand the basis of his grace has nothing to do with you. This is the unmerited, undeserved favor of God on us. We talked about the fact that the early church would always say that grace is God's riches at Christ's expense. And when we understand that there's nothing we can do to earn God's grace, and there's nothing we do to lose God's grace, and so we stand firm on that, and it gives us the hope in every situation. And too often in the church, we just pay lip service to God's grace. We say it this way. So often people look at the churches and they become, us the chosen frozen, right? There's the most joyless people are typically people sitting in church. And you're like, why? I mean, I don't understand this. And you say you have this hope and you say you have this joy because you have received through Christ this grace of God. It's like, how do you not just run up and how do you not just get so excited about that? We should be the most excited people. Why? Because our joy is so much bigger than our situation, because our joy is based in our salvation, and that salvation comes through the grace of God. And so for us, as a witness to that grace, we do a terrible disservice to that, because people don't see anything different in our lives versus their lives. This gets back to Peter's earlier point in 1 Peter 3:15. We have to always be ready to give an answer for the hope that's in us. Well, nobody's going to ask you about the hope that's in you if they don't see hope coming out of you. And so the grace of God is what anchors us in this. God's grace too, as we start to understand this in our lives, God's grace in our lives doesn't preclude the pain and suffering. It actually includes them. These things are used by God because it's through the pain and suffering of our lives, the trials and tribulations that Peter talked about earlier, that God is refining our faith. It's in them that we are being perfected. So even problems and trials in our lives are a means of God's grace in our life. God has plans for us and for our lives, and he has plans sometimes for the problem. Not sometimes, he has plans for the problems in our lives. And it's going to be our understanding of grace that helps anchor that. Real quick, as we get off of here, I talked about reading some of Corrie ten Boom. It's just a wonderful, you need to read some of her books. It's so encouraging. And it comes through even in the worst situations. And she's describing just horrifying circumstances. even in the midst of just talking about the worst situations that any human could ever understand, the Holocaust of a concentration camp in Nazi Germany, right? That's probably going to flag us on YouTube or whatever, Facebook, wherever you see this thing. I'm talking about Corrie ten Boom, right? When you see her hope, it just pours through in her words, even as she describes these most deplorable and most horrific situations, because her hope was not in her situation. Her hope was in her Savior. Her hope wasn't in her circumstances. Her hope was in her Creator. And I'm hoping that you get that, because I'm using alliteration, so I don't know how to help you any more than that. But I told the church Sunday that she talked about the fact that where her and her sister were, and they would have these Bible studies that were going on. It was Barracks 28. And throughout the concentration camp, among the prisoners there, it became known as the crazy place where they have hope. And in a place that was the most hopeless that you could ever face, they had hope. And everybody recognized it. And it gave an opportunity for them to share the source of that hope. And she lived the rest of her life. And she talks about it in her last book. I think it was A Tramp for Jesus, or Jesus' Tramp, or Tramp for God, where she literally, all she did was go around the world leaders, small churches, everywhere and anywhere she could, to share the source of the hope that she had. And so that's for us, right? If we're living in God's grace, if we truly understand God's grace, to the extent we understand God's grace, is going to be reflected in the way that we live our lives. And if we're living our lives firmly standing firm in God's grace, then it's going to be a life of hope, regardless of the circumstances and the situations of our life. And people are going to see that. They're going to recognize it, and they're going to ask us about that. So as we close down 1 Peter for us right now, the question is, when's the last time somebody asked you about the hope that you have in God? That's it. That's the thought for you today. Are you living a life that's so full of God's grace, that's so standing firm in God's grace, that others see the hope of God in you? Understanding that God's grace in our life doesn't preclude pain. It actually includes it, that God's working even through our pain and suffering to His glory and our good, to magnify His name, and an opportunity for us to be the salt and light that this world needs, because He is the only hope that we have in His grace poured out to us through Christ. That is the only hope that this world has. So that's my hope for you, is that you find the hope that is only found in God. All right? Because it's through that understanding that you're going to be able to get out in this crazy world. You're going to get out in that pit, and you're going to be able to love somebody today. So that's it. Get in the pit, go love somebody, and we will see you.